Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to greet you and to invite you to this launch of our mission, which is called Renaissance Now. My name is Doris Sommer. I am the professor of Romance languages and African American studies at Harvard, and on behalf of our Cultural Agents Initiative and the course on political intervention through the arts, it's my honor to greet you and to introduce to you our colleague, Charles Landry, who will make the next introduction. Charles is an author, speaker, and international authority on the use of imagination and creativity in urban change. His book on the creative city, the toolkit for urban innovators, became a movement to rethink planning, development, and management of cities. He's the author of more than 20 books. You may have seen The Civic City in a Nomadic World, or The Creative Bureaucracy and Radical Common Sense. He's the director of the Creative Bureaucracy Initiative. It's a very exciting network. I hope you will join it. Charles, it's my honor and privilege to ask you to speak and make the next introduction.
Thank you, Doris, and thanks for sort of triggering us off and catalyzing this initiative, Renaissance Now. We certainly need it. Well, I would like to just introduce Mainuma Sharif, who I think more or less everyone knows is the executive director of UN Habitat. I met her when she was, in fact, the mayor of Penang. And I already saw then that she was quite an interesting person, to put it mildly, and did a lot of initiatives. One of the major ones, which you should look up, is called Think City, which really looked at cities in a completely different way. Anyway, she escalated up to be executive director of UN Habitat, and here she comes.
My dear friend, Mr. Peter Kurz, Mayor of Mannheim, Mayor Tang Sawyer from Izmir, Turkey, city leaders and partners, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to address you today at the launch of the Renaissance Now, a new movement that brings us all together to discuss, address, and resolve critical challenges that face our societies and our planet today. In the past 18 months, whether we live in the biggest city or the smallest village, we realize that our lives are interconnected. The key lesson here is that no person is an island. We need to rebirth in the form of greater multilateral action if we are to build back better and greener. Global pandemics, climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, widespread and deepening inequalities, slowing economies, and conflicts in all continents cannot be addressed by one group of actors or alone. We all need to work together to find answers to these wicked problems. At UN Habitat, we work closely with government at the national and local level. We join hands with the private sector, professional, civil society leaders, community and grassroots representatives to localize the SDGs and implement the new urban agenda to develop sustainable cities, resilient societies, and inclusive communities. The Renaissance Now idea and initiative is urgent and fundamental to our common future. Let us join forces and put our heads together to build a better and brighter future for all, leaving no one and no place behind. Thank you.
That's great. Well, thank you, Mainuma. She wanted to be here, but I think there's some ministerial meeting at exactly this moment. Anyway, she was there. Anyway, can I hand over back to you, Doris? Tell us a bit about all of this Renaissance Now business, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Charles, and my sincere thanks to Maimuna. I'm looking forward to thanking her personally. The idea of Renaissance Now is urgent because we have forgotten the spirit that rebuilt the world after the medieval plague. At that time, its scholars, intellectuals, artists came out of their cloisters and literally engaged in the world in ways that they would not have imagined before. They took risks. They worked like scientists, all of them, between trial and error, and they made collaborations. A Renaissance man, a Renaissance person is misunderstood as someone who can do everything. A Renaissance person is someone who combines boldness, audacity with humility, thinking beyond existing paradigms and also submitting oneself to the expertise of other people in order to make collaborations. People who know the history of the Renaissance know about deals made between artists and bankers, between politicians and musicians and rhetoricians. We forget sometimes that the great poet Petrarch was an ambassador and an advisor to other politicians. This is urgent. We need to learn to talk to one another, to make these collaborations. And the extra piece that I want to develop with you and with everyone is the piece of the humanities. We know what art is good for, and we'll learn more about that today as ignition, as change. The humanities are a moment to step back, to reflect, to see what other people think, to learn many points of view. Humanists are curious about many points of view, and they don't want to resolve doubt. This is an energy of intellectual reflection that can accompany our risk-taking. So welcome to this launch. Let's think together about projects that we can accomplish together through trial and error, and we'll dedicate the long session, the breakout session, to coming up with real concrete ideas that we can share together. So I'm just delighted to see you. My optimism soars just seeing this group and looking forward to the talks that we'll hear. First about challenges, and then about some good ideas that we can adopt and follow. And without taking any more time, it's my pleasure to invite the mayor of Izmir, Turkey, Mayor Tunç Soyer, who is a pathbreaker in this area of combining arts and administration. And Mayor Soyer from 2004 to 2006 served as the Director of Foreign Relations in the Izmir Chamber of Commerce. And in 2006, he was appointed as General Secretary of Expo Izmir. And then he was elected mayor. And he carried on this task for 2 terms. He implemented the international local scale development model. And this is a very important innovation because combining, as I say, innovation with scientific measurement is really on our agenda. And as I say, he is a pathbreaker for local government and for innovation through the arts. Mayor Soyer, I give you the floor and my sincere thanks for your presence here.
Thank you so much. I congratulate and take great pleasure in endorsing this new initiative, Renaissance Now, calling on all of us to harness the power of art, creativity, and culture to renew public policy to address the great challenges of our time. COVID-19, along with the climate crisis and losses of biodiversity, threatens the sustainable development of our cities and communities. These are our common challenges without borders. In this respect, global solidarity and sustainable urbanization is crucial in facing these mega challenges. Cultural vitality is one of our 4 pillars of sustainability, along with economic prosperity, social equity, and environmental responsibility. In my city of Izmir, named Smyrna in ancient times, we have been experiencing these challenges at first hand. Izmir saw a large forest fire, a tsunami, an earthquake, a drought, and a severe flood, all in the last 2 years. We leaned on culture and art to bounce back because we know it is the lifeblood of our local communities. Culture is in every aspect of our daily life. Culture links our history with our future. We are in a new period of knowledge and creativity-driven growth. Economic opportunities created by cultural and creative industries, particularly for young people, have taken on greater importance in this time of transition. Knowledge-based economies favor ideas to stimulate innovation, and they develop specialized services and highly customized products. In the cultural economies, necessary raw materials are not natural resources, but human creativity. We invest in social capital to fulfill the potential of Izmir's creative economy and to promote cultural rights, diversity, and social cohesion. Since the creative economy is human-based, it can only flourish if we can empower people. In this respect, inclusive democracy is our priority in Izmir. The Global Network of United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, will hold its 4th Culture Summit in Izmir this September. This will be a great occasion for cities of the world to work together to connect culture and urban resilience. We will exchange our experiences and ideas to foster cultural policies on heritage, creativity, diversity, and knowledge, which are key for local sustainable development. We will promote culture as the 4th pillar of development and a core component of global solidarity. We will invest together in cultural policies. We will strengthen our tools for dialogue, coexistence, and freedom. In this way, we will work to make cities and local governments more active in implementing the 2030 agenda. The summit will also be an excellent opportunity for cities across the world to connect with the local culture of Izmir. The city has accumulated arts and culture for 8,500 years. There are an impressive number of cultural heritages in the city. With all these heritages, we believe that Izmir and its people deserve a cultural renaissance. I want the Culture Summit to be the trigger of this cultural and artistic revitalization. In this hope, I invite you all to the summit on the 9th of September. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mayor Tunç. I hope we can all be there in one form or the other. Thank you very much. Great stuff. Just a few tiny words about why the hell is the creative bureaucracy aligning with Renaissance Now? And of course, we love to. And really, we're trying to create a bridge because in the end, you have to turn things into reality. And of course, the bureaucracy, the public administration, we're using bureaucracy in a good way, is not everything. But without one, you can't achieve very much. And so it's a bit of a blind spot, you know, when we talk about creativity and so on, it's often left out as something that's just over there. And what we believe in the Renaissance now idea is that all these partners need to be part of this bigger ecosystem, because we also need to, in a sense, bring together the collective intelligences, as Doris outlined, together, because only then will we actually have the, I mean, I suppose, the widest form of knowledge to address problems. And as we all know, we need to dramatically get rid of silos. Nothing against specialist knowledges, but we do need to actually collaborate from different perspectives, a 360-degree perspective, if you like. So off we go, I think, into the next session.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your wonderful initiative that inspires us to Renaissance Now. It's my privilege now to introduce the moderator for our Challengers panel. This is a panel dedicated to hearing policymakers challenge us with projects that they need to face. We need to hear from people who are making decisions what the obstacles are, what their dreams are, why they need us to ignite their work with more art. And I'm delighted to introduce the Senator of the Congress in Chile, Senator Guido Girardi, who has an incredible initiative in Chile, which is now a very promising spot for public creativity. Many of you know that Chile is geared towards rethinking its constitution, towards an important federal election, and all eyes and optimisms are geared towards Chile. And Senator Girardi is one of the important motors of that movement of optimism. He's a medical doctor, already making these bridges between one set of knowledge and another, between medicine, science, and administration. And the Congress that he developed, the Congreso Futuro, the Futures Congress, is an international initiative that brings together specialists from an entire range of fields to talk to one another, to ignite one another, and to come up with projects. He has innovated in regulating tobacco, fast foods, the pharmacy industry. He was president of the Senate of Chile between 2011 and 2012, and he is a leader in Renaissance Now. One thing we should know about Renaissance Now is that it wants to collect good vanguards that already exist and that can recognize one another and fuel a larger movement. So Senator Girardi will be introducing our speakers in Spanish. So we have the advantage of a bilingual session, and you will see the English bios on your screen as he announces people. I invite Ege Yildirim, who is part of our steering committee in Renaissance Now, and who will be replacing Shipra because of the complexities of these challenges. I invite Ege to introduce herself the way I introduced myself as part of the central team. So why don't we start with Ege, and then we'll pass the baton to Senator Girardi, who will introduce the other speakers. Okay, thank you, Ege, and thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Doris. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. As Doris said, I'm a last-minute replacement, Plan B, of another woman we need to have women on our panels. We do not want manels, we want panels. Shipra Narang Suri is our dear friend, but she unfortunately had a ministerial meeting, and actually the states parties that they're meeting with is part of one of the highlights that I want to talk about in my few minutes with you. I'm an urban planner from Turkey. I've specialized in cultural heritage conservation management throughout my career, but from early on, I've developed an interest in stakeholder relations and sustainable urbanization, and I've been following the Habitat 2, Habitat 3 agendas of the UN, and one of my recent main jobs was being the Sustainable Development Goals focal point at ICOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, a global NGO of experts on cultural heritage. And here today, to make it meaningful for the theme of the panel of policy and challenges, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Culture 2030 goal campaign that I'm also actively involved in through ICOMOS and UCLG. And when we say policymakers, maybe the first thing that comes to mind are governments, national governments. And when we're talking about the SDGs, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is the UN system. The UN is United Nations, national governments, but are national governments the only parties, the actors who make policy today? When we're talking about democracy, when we're talking about partnerships, one of the 5 Ps of the Agenda 2030, don't nation states have to partner up with non-state actors? And the Culture 2030 goal campaign is composed of non-state actors, cultural NGOs and local government networks that work on culture. The Culture Committee of the United Cities Local Governments, UCLG, is one of our steering committee members. I'd also like to briefly mention the other members of our steering group, Arterial Network from the African region, Culture Action Europe from the European region, ICOMOS, as I mentioned, the International Federation of Coalitions for Cultural Diversity, IFCCD, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA, the International Music Council, IMC, the Latin American Network of Arts for Social Transformation, and UCLG. So we have come together to lobby, to advocate, campaign on a specific thing, really, which is to have a culture goal. This has started from before the SDGs, the 2015 adoption of the SDGs. Since 2013, we've been following especially UNESCO's declaration, the Hangzhou Declaration, where it was clearly expressed that culture should be the 4th dimension of sustainable development. So we're operating mainly at the UN, the international advocacy level, but it doesn't really mean much unless it's localized. You know, it has to speak to local actors, people who are on the ground, who do things. So these networks that we permeate are critical for our work to have any meaning. Since 2013, even though we could not have our coveted culture goal as one of those 17 standalone global goal headings, we've still been working now for the next iteration. Maybe in 2030, we will finally have a culture goal. But as Doris and other colleagues, friends here will highlight, I'm sure, that culture has different aspects, and the arts is what we really are here to talk about, that aspect of culture, the dynamic aspect of culture. So working with Doris in the last months, I really learned so much about how that arts component needs to be really at the center of the culture debate in terms of the dynamism it provides. And a few more points on what we've been doing since then. In 2019, we've been tracking what national governments in their annual reports, the voluntary national reviews to the UN, how they have talked about culture in their reports. It's not nearly as much as we'd like. Now in 2021, we're following up with a report tracking local governments, how they are reporting to the UN. And that is a rising movement. Local governments are rising to the occasion to actually influence UN policy. In 2020, when the pandemic broke out, we issued a culture COVID-19 statement, which was endorsed by the President of the UN General Assembly, plus 280 other organizations and individuals. We really invite you to endorse this this statement. I'll share the links on the chat box with you later, culture2030goal.net. And I was asked to present a challenge, as we all are, in closing my remarks. So I suppose it's how do we localize the SDGs from the culture perspective in the UN system? How do we make culture fully present in the SDGs? And what does that mean really? How do we make it work for everybody else in the world? Is a goal enough? We believe it is absolutely required, but how does a goal help to change society? And how do we actually work better, more effectively with the decision makers who make these agendas? Because these agendas at the end of the day influence budgets, influence the debate, the talk in public opinion. But these are suggestions that actually we can question today. So I invite you to think about these last sentences, how true they are, or how to tackle them in terms of the actual goal that we are all here today, in terms of art as a societal game changer. Thank you very much. I think that should be enough for me now.
Okay, thank you so much, Ege. And Senator Girardi, we're grateful for your moderation for the rest of the panel. Thank you. And Alain will show the English version of your introductions. Thank you.
Bueno, primero agradecer a todas y a todos. Para mí es un honor poder estar moderando este panel. Solo decir que voy a hablar en español porque me desenvuelvo mejor en ese idioma y además es mi idioma nativo. Creo que tenemos desafíos gigantescos en esta materia. Yo creo que lo que está en cuestión hoy día es la democracia, es la convivencia, es la sobrevivencia del planeta. Yo diría que el principal desafío, tal vez el más importante, es cambiar la manera de pensar. Nosotros somos hijos de la segunda revolución industrial, de un mundo muy vertical, de un mundo de inteligencia concentrada, y esa era jerárquica de la segunda revolución industrial que creó una industria, una política, instituciones, todo un chasis institucional del siglo XX para, yo considero que eso está en cuestión, hoy día es obsoleto, un chasis vertical. La inteligencia que tiene que generar la democracia, porque la democracia tiene un desafío, generar inteligencia colaborativa. En el siglo XX, en la era analógica, era una inteligencia que se hacía desde las instituciones del Estado, desde una visión concentrada, desde los partidos políticos, los parlamentos. Ahí estaba concentrada la inteligencia. Y la inteligencia que se generaba a partir de esas instituciones era una inteligencia lineal, que sirvió para el siglo XX, pero no sirve para la complejidad del siglo XXI. El siglo XXI es una era distinta, es una era horizontal, es una era colaborativa, es una era compleja, y tenemos una inteligencia que es lineal para enfrentar un mundo complejo. Y por lo tanto, el gran desafío de la humanidad es justamente entender que la inteligencia ya no está en las instituciones del Estado, no está en los partidos políticos, no está en los congresos, no está en los gobiernos, sino que está distribuida en la sociedad. Y nosotros tenemos que construir un modelo deliberativo, participativo, que sea capaz de recuperar esa inteligencia que está distribuida en la sociedad. No solamente de las universidades, no solamente de los intelectuales, de los científicos, de los artistas, sobre todo de los ciudadanos, de los territorios. Y yo creo que ese es el gran desafío. Hoy día tenemos una inteligencia que no es abarcativa, una inteligencia que no entiende los desafíos del siglo XXI. Y además, esto se da en un contexto que yo considero que es muy dramático, porque al no haber respuesta de las instituciones tradicionales y estar caminando a la obsolescencia, tenemos una tormenta perfecta. Tenemos desigualdades heredadas gigantescas en el mundo entero. Tenemos una crisis generada por los seres humanos, que es el cambio climático y la destrucción del planeta, que amenazan con extinguir la vida en el planeta. Eso acompañado de una velocidad gigantesca y exponencial de las tecnologías que los cerebros humanos no alcanzan a procesar y que las democracias van detrás y no logran gobernar, un problema de gobernanza, de gobernabilidad. Y al mismo tiempo tenemos una multicrisis de una sociedad que no se siente incluida. y tenemos una clase media que producto de la globalización ha ido proletarizándose, que no se siente representada por las instituciones políticas. Incluso los partidos de izquierda han dejado de representar al mundo popular. Nosotros hemos apostado por una visión de multiculturalismo, por defender a las minorías indígenas, a las minorías de opción sexual distinta, pero hemos abandonado en cierta manera la representación de las grandes mayorías de seres humanos en el planeta que viven en situaciones de desigualdad extrema, que ya no están representadas por los partidos, ni siquiera por los partidos de izquierda, que hemos abandonado nuestro discurso que tiene que ver justamente con la representación de esa gran mayoría que es un mundo mudo, que no tiene representación la naturaleza, no tiene representación los árboles, las plantas, no tienen representación los animales. Entonces, esta democracia que tenemos es una democracia que nos sirve para el siglo XXI y tenemos que profundizarla. Las universidades, de mi punto de vista, reproducen el mundo del pasado. Las universidades no están pensando, no hay visión estratégica. Estamos rehenes del presentismo, de la inmediatez. El futuro no es un sujeto político porque no vota. Como el futuro no vota, no tiene representación. Y lo que está emergiendo, entonces, es el auge de los populismos en el mundo entero, porque la humanidad necesita certezas. Y cuando las instituciones no dan certeza, las instituciones tradicionales no construyen inteligencia, y además en una crisis global de pérdida de valores fundamentales, están en crisis las religiones, están en crisis las ideologías, los estados nacionales que están superados por esta era del ciberespacio que no tiene fronteras, que disruptan los estados nacionales. Entonces, cuando se pierden los valores fundamentales, aumenta la incertidumbre y aumenta la necesidad de certeza. Y esa necesidad de certeza está siendo capturada por los populismos, por los Trump, por los Bolsonaro, que están representando justamente lo que nosotros no estamos representando. Y por lo tanto es un gigantesco desafío para el futuro. Nosotros construimos el Congreso del Futuro, que hablaba Doris, que es un encuentro de nuestro mundo, es un laboratorio de innovación social, que busca unir la ciencia, el arte, la belleza a los ciudadanos, y tenemos 3 millones de seguidores todos los años. Es un desafío de frontera, y ese desafío de frontera nos permite explorar. Invitamos a 100 de los más importantes intelectuales del planeta todos los años. Y hemos hecho un evento que se transforma en un espacio de conversación del país. Acabamos de hacer un encuentro de democracia deliberativa con Stanford. Estamos trabajando en una ley de neuroderecho con Rafael Yuste de la Universidad de Columbia, que es la primera ley que va a establecer derechos a la indemnidad de nuestro cerebro frente a la dictadura del futuro, que son las plataformas y las tecnologías que se están apropiando de datos y que están ya teniendo la capacidad de leer los cerebros. Tenemos que ofrecer respuesta a los desafíos de la inteligencia artificial, gobernar el ciberespacio. El ciberespacio es el territorio del futuro, es como la California en los tiempos de la fiebre del oro, pero está totalmente desregulado, el paraíso para el mundo neoliberal y para las plataformas que se apropiaron de él. O sea, desafío gigantesco para permitir la sobrevivencia del planeta. Bueno, en ese contexto, yo me siento muy contento de poder presentar primero en este panel a Sergio Fajardo, que fue alcalde de Antioquía, que es un matemático, lo voy a poner así, antes que ser político, y que ha sido elegido alcalde de Medellín, ha sido candidato a la vicepresidencia, ha sido candidato también a la vicepresidencia y luego a la presidencia en el año 2018, y es un privilegio poder tenerlo aquí. Así que, Sergio, te doy la palabra.
Hello, I'm Sergio Fajardo and I'm talking to you from Colombia, South America. I want to share with you what we are living today in our country. We have seen some expression of social unrest that we had never seen before in Colombia. It's the voice of people who have come to the streets for more than a month and a half, shouting, showing their indignation in our society, the way they feel in a society that doesn't provide the answers that they are looking for. Plenty of uncertainties. In particular, the core of this social mobilization is the group of young people in Colombia who have no future. Many of them see no possibilities in our society, and they are claiming, asking for opportunities in our country. As I said, this is something that we had never seen before, and we have quite a challenge in a country that is going through difficult, very difficult times associated with the pandemic, the COVID-19, all the main troublesome factors of our society, inequalities, corruption, and violence have shown up, and we have to deal with them, but we have to pay very, very close attention to this group of young people that are claiming for opportunities. And we have a few challenges. One that is worldwide known, what education has to do with the opportunities that we want to build for this generation of young people. That's quite a challenge, global challenge, but at the same time, we have to look at the way these young people live, how they do in their communities. Many of them belonging to the poor sector of our society. No jobs, no education, no hope. What can we do? We have had some experiences. In Medellin, for example, we went through very troublesome times, and we worked out a few programs. And among those programs, there were some programs that turned out to be very interesting, very crucial in the way we were building alternatives to that generation back then in Medellin, Colombia. And those programs had to do with art, culture, looking for ways of allowing these kids to show their creativity. And now the question is, a few years later, with what we are living now in the world, associated with the digital world, technology, the uncertainties that we all face with climate change, the future of employment, is there a role for working with these kids and making sense of our culture as part of their lives, so that they can bet on those talents that we found, and I'm sure we have all over the place, but have never considered the opportunity of developing them in this world of creation? That's a big question, and I'm sure that if we manage to collect some of the experiences that we have had, but a new vision, new ideas relating to culture and young people and way of expressing in these times, we can, in order to make Colombia, and in particular for these communities, a much better place. That's my challenge.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Sergio, muy interesante. Quisiera ahora darle la palabra a Peter Kurz, que ha sido alcalde de Mannheim en Alemania desde el año 2007. Ha tenido distintos cargos a nivel internacional, ha sido miembro del Comité Europeo de las Regiones, ha sido también vicepresidente del Parlamento Global de Alcaldes, ha sido miembro del Comité Europeo de las Regiones y de la Asociación Alemana de Ciudades y Pueblos, es presidente de la Asociación de Ciudades de Baden-Württemberg y miembro de la Junta Asociación de la Ciudad de Baden-Württemberg. Así que, Peter, te damos la palabra. Muchas gracias.
Dear friends and colleagues, I am delighted to join you today for the launch of the Renaissance Now project. I would imagine most people working in local government can connect to the early modern Renaissance approach evoked by this initiative. In local government, in a given day, we might jump from a meeting with a local bank to a workshop regarding decentralized vaccination to opening a new preschool, all before lunch. We know that bringing together people with different backgrounds and areas of expertise can lead to real creative thinking and new solutions. In Mannheim, Issues of equity and accessibility, two sides of the same coin, are central challenges for the city. The pandemic has worsened the situation and highlighted the work that we have left to do. These are not problems that can be addressed by city leaders alone or solved by academics in classrooms. Instead, we need people from many different disciplines and backgrounds to work together. We are already proud of the work we are doing in this regard. One exciting example of the way we are addressing inequity in our city is the Oriental Music Academy in Mannheim. A young Turkish man, Mehmet Ungan, took the initiative and opened a school for so-called Oriental instruments, like the oud and ney. He was able to engage many young people with the program, especially those with Turkish and Arab heritage. His school was so successful that it is now, with our support, embedded in the city's Pop Academy as a World Music Studies program. The Pop Academy is now the only institute of higher education in Germany with this kind of program. But that's not all. Mehmet started to take care of children in the district of the academy, especially new arrivals from Bulgaria and Romania, giving them a constructive way to spend their time. He took responsibility just because he saw help was needed, addressing equity issues through music education and integration under one roof. In cities like Mannheim, we face challenges like inequality that cut through every fiber of the work we do. I think it is clear that we cannot address them in silos, but as Renaissance men and women together. Civil society initiatives like Renaissance Now have an important role to play in bringing people together to develop creative ideas and innovative solutions. Cooperation and collaboration from civil society can fill important gaps that government cannot address. Renaissance Now offers an exciting platform. The idea of Renaissance Now is so obvious and yet disregarded by our siloed world. But crisis means there is a need for change. Art is a game changer for societal challenges. And that's why we need to cross divides and tear down silos to bring science, technology, arts, politics, and more together. Art is the key, and if we continue to include the power of art only indecisively and with blinders on, we are gambling away decisive potential. I'm happy to be here today to join this conversation, and I look forward to seeing how the work of Renaissance Now develops. I wish you all a fruitful debate and successful work in the months and years ahead.
Gracias, Peter. Le vamos a dar la palabra ahora a Samet Wahba, que es director global de la práctica global urbana, que tiene que ver con la gestión de riesgo de desastres, resiliencia y suelo del Banco Mundial. Tiene más de 25 años de experiencia en desarrollo urbano e infraestructura, y antes de trabajar en el Banco Mundial estuvo en el Instituto de Estudio de Vivienda y Desarrollo Urbano y en el Centro de Estudio de Desarrollo Urbano de Harvard. Samet, te damos la palabra. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Senator. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you might be. My name is Sameh Wahba. I oversee both urban development and disaster risk management, resilience, and land work at the World Bank. And it's great for me to be here to join you both in my alma mater, to see great colleagues that I've worked with in the past, but also some of our important clients like the city of Izmir and Mayor Tunç. So for us, I mean, culture, creativity, and art are critical, not just for development, but also for sustainable development, and furthermore, in my own area of expertise, for sustainable urban development. And of course, for resilience. It's not a dividend of development, it's a critical input to it. And in the same way that we do need human capital, natural capital, institutional capital, of course, we do need culture and creativity to be nurtured and so that they can contribute to sustainable development. Now, in particular today, and especially in a context of COVID and a post-COVID recovery, I mean, cultural resources, creative industries, and art are more relevant than ever, because as people are struggling, were struggling, continue to struggle to make sense of the high death counts, the growing poverty, and the jobs that have been lost in the wake of the COVID pandemic, culture has stepped, to become a very important lifeline to people. But at the same time, we know that cultural professionals and creative industry professionals have been amongst the hardest hit groups. I mean, much of their activities hinges on personal interaction and presential work. They mostly work quite a bit in informal arrangements. They lack access to safety nets. And, in a context of COVID, with declining economic activities that are resulting in a contraction of, tax revenues, etc., it's obviously one of the first line items that gets cut in terms of the budget, and especially for capital investment. So for us at the World Bank, and especially in partnership with UNESCO, we've put a very important emphasis on cultural heritage, creativity as an underpinning for both urban development and resilience. So we've developed with UNESCO a framework called CURE, which stands for Culture in City Reconstruction and Recovery. And this framework basically posits that in a context of post-crisis, and crisis here is a broader term involving natural hazards, involving conflict, but also involving situations of urban distress, like that the city of Medellin has gone through with years of, the urban decline before a group of sustained mayors, of which mayor and who eventually became governor, Fajardo, is part of, have transformed the city. And the way we look at this framework is that culture is basically a form of a glue that binds two types of interventions or policies, people-centered policies and place-based policies that contribute toward development. And often those two tend to be seen as some sort of an either-or situation. You either invest in people or you invest in places. Whereas what we're trying to argue is you need both. In a context of post-disaster or post-conflict intervention, you need to both, you take, for instance, a city like the city of Mosul, for instance, or Bandar Aceh, in Indonesia in a post-disaster, or again, Medellin, as I mentioned, you need both investment in people and in place. You need investment in people to give them opportunities to invest in human capital. But at the same time, as you're investing in people, you need to infuse it with a sense of place, with a sense of identity that roots this kind of work, so it does not become, a cookie cutter type interventions. In the same way, you can't leave places behind. You can't, for instance, in a context of a city of Medellin, to say, slums and informal settlements, we're turning our back on these. And we just offer housing voucher for people so that they can go and find housing wherever they want. You want to encourage mobility, you want to encourage investment in human capital, but you don't want to leave places behind as well. There's lots of stranded assets from a climate perspective, and there's lots of investment, including in culture, in identity in these places. So the idea of investing and leveraging culture as a foundation to both invest in place and in people becomes really critical. And this type of approach has proven instrumental in bringing about investments in community engagement, in social inclusion, in reconciliation, and in resilience. And our work in cities as diverse as Mosul, Medellin, Timbuktu, or Banda Aceh is an example. Now, we've just released a second joint publication with UNESCO called Culture, Cities, and Creativity. And again, the emphasis of it is that culture and creativity can not just benefit cities in time of crisis, but also in their quest to be transformed into more dynamic and more inclusive and more competitive urban hubs. So in other words, culture and creativity can bring about a revitalization of urban neighborhoods, can bring greater inclusivity, social cohesion, but also competitiveness, in differentiating people. So we've looked at 9 case studies. You've looked at how, you know, a municipal government like that of Johannesburg in South Africa has revitalized, you know, historically artistic, racially diverse neighborhoods, including the neighborhood of Newtown. We've looked at how the city of Santos in Brazil has leveraged, again, in a context of inequality, both social and economic, has leveraged culture, art, and the creative industries to transform its vulnerable neighborhood. And with that, I think we've developed a framework that looks at what are those key enablers that would help ensure that culture, art, and creativity can help transform cities. And those enablers, we look at issues related to the physical and the spatial environment, urban infrastructure and livability. We look at human capital, skills and innovation, networks, and how we can bring support infrastructure, social network catalyzer, finance, institutional regulatory environment, especially inclusive institutions, and then the dimensions of uniqueness and the digital environment that underpins this work. These we found to be the enablers that local governments and mayors use to various degrees in order to be able to help culture, art, and creativity transform the built environment. We've applying this framework in a variety of places, including in Gansu in China. We're also starting this work also in the reconstruction of Beirut post the port explosion with a small intervention that focuses on you know, restoring cultural heritage and revitalizing the creative industries. Now, in terms of challenge, I mean, since you're asking us to leave you with a challenge in the end. So as you can see from our work at the World Bank, I mean, you know, we're the converted ones. You don't need to preach to us about the importance of culture, art, and creativity. However, we are a demand-driven institution. We respond to our clients' needs and priorities. So when we're sitting with a mayor like Mayor Tunç or any other mayor, and especially also when we're sitting with the Minister of Finance of that country, who has a smaller envelope in terms of resources to deploy to a variety of areas of intervention to contribute to our twin goals of poverty alleviation and reducing inequality. The trade-off becomes, why should I invest into art, culture, and creativity, as opposed to, say, you know, deploying the envelope that I have towards more urgent interventions, whether they're human capital, as in health expenditures, education, social protection, or more pressing service delivery challenges like water and sanitation. So how to make a case to a mayor, you know, I mean, probably a mayor will be sold on it, but how do we make a case to a Minister of Finance that prioritizing art, culture, and creativity is as important, if not in, you know, in certain contexts, more important than other types of more pressing interventions in, as I mentioned, on service delivery or human capital. And maybe my plug into an answer, you know, do not look at it as yet another sector for intervention, but start thinking about how it underpins, you know, how it needs to be mainstreamed across sectors, how it needs to be integrated and embedded into urban regeneration so that it becomes critical to the transformation of cities. With that, thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Samet. Ha sido un panel muy interesante. Me gustaría un par de conclusiones. Efectivamente, estamos viendo una crisis planetaria global y tal vez el principal desafío es entender que lo que hemos vivido desde los años 80 ha sido una globalización de mi punto de vista neoliberal, y esa globalización ha sido para los ganadores, dejando a miles de millones de seres humanos como perdedores. El desafío es cómo hacemos una reglobalización para los perdedores, para rehabilitar a los ciudadanos y ciudadanas del planeta, para rehabilitar los sistemas y los estados de bienestar, las garantías sociales básicas y mínimas, para enfrentar la crisis ecológica y las pandemias que vamos a seguir teniendo si no enfrentamos las crisis ecológicas. Y aquí hay un tema que es cultural. Yo creo que el factor fundamental es cambiar la cultura, porque los valores fundamentales que han permitido esto y los valores fundamentales de Occidente son justamente estos valores que nos están destruyendo, que son un cáncer, que son el individualismo, la competencia, que son esta idea de la tiranía del mérito, de que si tú te esfuerzas y se promueve el individualismo te va a ir bien, independientemente de cuáles son las condiciones sociales que te rodean. Yo creo que esas visiones, esos valores, donde todos los seres humanos solo están motivados para consumir, para competir, y no ponemos por delante valores de solidaridad, valores de cooperación, valores de respeto al resto de los seres vivos, a la naturaleza, valores que tienen que ver con la dignidad humana, yo creo que difícilmente vamos a poder cambiar los destinos de nuestra humanidad. Tal vez, yo decía esto en el contexto de las crisis de la ideología, de los estados nacionales, de las religiones, se hace mucho más urgente reponer valores fundamentales. El punto es si es posible poner esos valores fundamentales. Y yo creo que es posible. De hecho, las mujeres en el mundo tienen mucho más posibilidad de cooperación y solidaridad que los hombres, y los hombres en el mundo representan la competencia, representan lo jerárquico, lo autoritario, porque hemos sido educados así. ¿Es posible educar a una sociedad para que sea una sociedad con capacidad de compartir, de tener empatía, de tener solidaridad? Yo creo que sí. Y ese es el desafío fundamental. Por lo tanto, yo valoro mucho este panel y creo que los elementos centrales del futuro y para la sobrevivencia del ser humano, el ser humano hoy día está en competencia con las tecnologías, podemos pasar a un post-humano, estamos en la frontera de que el ser humano deje de ser quien toma las decisiones y vayamos siendo reemplazados por los algoritmos. Ya una parte importante de los seres humanos en el mundo eligen sus parejas sexuales por Tinder. El amor se empieza a transformar en una optimización matemática. Ese mundo es el mundo que estamos entrando a vivir. Vamos a habitar el ciberespacio, donde estamos en riesgo de ser programados, de que nuestras emociones, de que nuestros deseos, nuestras conductas sean productos de diseño externo y no nuestros. Entonces tenemos desafíos gigantescos, pero de mi punto de vista, lo más importante es justamente reponer los valores fundamentales y definir cuáles son los valores fundamentales. Para mí, salvar el planeta, los valores ecológicos, los valores de solidaridad, son los valores que esta cultura, para reglobalizar, debieran estar en el centro de los desafíos futuros. Así que muchas gracias por este panel.
Thanks. So shall we now move on to the next panel? And I think Stephen is going to moderate that in an elegant way. So off you go.
Thank you very much, Charles. So I'm Stephen Weibert, Manager Policy and Advocacy at the International Federation of Library Associations. But here I'm representing the Culture 2030 Goal campaign, as already presented by Ege Yildirim earlier. And just to say, I can only underline that it'll be good in future events that we have fewer people like me, men, and we have definitely good balanced panels there. So I hope that through this work, we really bring together some excellent examples. It's an honor for the campaign to be here to support the launch of Renaissance Now, and it's thrilling to know that such an illustrious, dynamic group is focusing on making the case for art as the enabler, as the catalyst of a new model of development. This session, which I'm honored to moderate, is focused on just this: examples of art as a game changer, providing a launch pad for our breakout session subsequently. And so, without further ado, I wanted to invite Doris Summer to take the floor to talk more about this idea of game changers. Doris, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Senator Girardi, for your comments. You're an inspiration. You know how to put together the map for changing values. And the only way to do that is through culture, through educating ourselves and our children differently. I'm very grateful for the past panel, very grateful to Sameh Waba also for really isolating our greatest challenge, which is making sense of investments in arts and creativity. What I want to say, and I will speak in my name and in the name of Tarun Khanna, our colleague from the School of Business at Harvard, who will be moderating one of the breakout rooms. What I want to say is that art is the name of change. He is an expert in entrepreneurship. And when we started to talk about art and social change, he realized that any entrepreneur is an artist. You make things up. You know that 9 out of 10 projects that you make up will fail, but it does not discourage you because that's part of the process. Entrepreneurs, game changers are all artists. I'm a great fan of the German poet and philosopher Friedrich Schiller. He simply identified a drive that is human and basic and universal. And this speaks to Senator Girardi's important message to be inclusive. And we can be inclusive through the arts because we all have a drive to be creative. Schiller coined a word in German that we like to use in other languages, and it's the Spieltrieb, the play drive. We are a dynamic species. People don't stay still. If we don't create vehicles, collaborations, ways to be creative and to be active, people get frustrated, they get bored, and that is a recipe for violence. So the arts are important not only to make new things, but to exercise our human capacity for creativity, to exercise that energy. I also want to say that I'm a great fan of Colombia because of Mayor Fajardo's work, but also because of Mayor Mocos's work in Bogota. Some of my friends know the incredible game changer that Mocos was in Bogota in 1995, when it seemed that there was nothing to be done in a violent, chaotic, corrupt city that was run by drug lords. Mocos stopped, reflected as an artist and humanist does, although he's a mathematician too, like Fajardo. And he asked himself, what would an artist do? That's the game-changing question. What would an artist do? Because artists see paradigms, even cultural paradigms, and they say, how am I going to change this? How am I going to intervene? That's why Ege mentioned that I've been underlining the difference between one definition of culture and another. There are at least two, and they're in conflict. One definition of culture as legacy invites us to respect existing forms, paradigms, traditions, beliefs. But Senator Girardi reminds us that we need to attack existing values and beliefs. For example, the value of competition, the value of hierarchy, the value of centralization. That is part of our everyday culture now. And how do we make those incursions? How do we change people's perspective, vision, desire? Only through cultural work, and that is the work of art, the cultural work of interrupting paradigm. Art sparks novelty. It takes risks. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But not to take those risks is to lose optimism and to lose our objective of reaching new values that animate us, that make us want to collaborate. And Mocos, as some of you know, when there was nothing to be done in Bogota, took an offensive comment about bringing out the clowns as a real directive because he's a jokester, and he turned the central area of Bogota into a place that was free of corrupt traffic cops because he hired pantomime artists to direct traffic. And the peer pressure and the laughter and the shame that jaywalkers felt, that was the game changer. Not changing laws and not raising the price of traffic tickets, because none of that was working. Shame and laughter and collaboration worked. That's the contribution that I want to make to this conversation is through people whom I admire and whom I want to inspire us in the breakout rooms that we'll have. So I thank you very much, Stephen, for allowing me to speak in your panel, and I turn the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, really, for also for setting this scene and really underlining what it is, how arts can be a game changer. And I think we're going to have some excellent examples from our next speakers. So first of all, I would like to invite to the floor Pierluigi Sacco, who is a professor of cultural economics at Iulm University Milan, co-director of the Computational Human Behavior Lab at the Bruno Kessler Foundation, Trento, senior researcher at Metal Lab at Harvard, and head of Venice office of the OECD. He's also been a special advisor of former European Commissioner for Education and Culture, Tiwan Navracic, and has advisory roles in Europeana, as well as in the Czech Republic and Georgia. He works and consults internationally in the fields of culture-led local development, policy design, and evaluation. And Professor Sacco will be talking about the OECD's work on arts and health. So over to you, Professor Sacco.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to be in such a company. I think that it's a sign of the times that we are able to gather so many bright minds and in some sense also life trajectories through this very, very ambitious endeavor. I would like to start I will come, of course, to the OECD perspective at the end, because I think that it's important to convey the message, which is absolutely true. It's not an exaggeration that we are in an unprecedented moment of relevance of the cultural agenda at the global level, and we must take advantage of this. But before discussing briefly in which sense, I think it's important to give a few background considerations to set a stage. First of all, we're speaking about Renaissance now. So we're speaking about Renaissance in the first place and the possibility of making Renaissance happen again. Well, there is lots of misunderstanding about why Renaissance is so important and what it was actually. We tend to think in terms of Renaissance people, just in terms of, polymaths that were at the same time, let's say, great artists and great mathematicians or physicists and so on and so forth. But we don't understand that what made Renaissance really possible was the society in which these people were embedded. Because you can be a genius, and I mean, no society has been short of geniuses, actually. But the problem is how you accept this divergent thinking and what you do with it. Just make an example that is, the example of the Renaissance man. Think of Leonardo. For his age, Leonardo was a rather bizarre guy. He was gay. He dug cemeteries at night to take out corpses to make some anatomy experiments and other things like this. So he was a total weirdo from the point of view of a, say, very, very common sense definition. But nevertheless, he and many other people like him were actually able to do what they did, because that kind of society was able to give value and to look beyond the appearances of these people. And in particular, this means that those kind of societies were really able to create a communication between very different fields of expertise and very different perspectives. Why? Because Renaissance was about risk-taking. This is something we tend absolutely to overlook. I mean, Renaissance was a period of exceptional cultural commissioning, but we don't understand today how risky it was, because this cultural commissioning was related in a very profound way to political strategy. Italy was one of the weakest militarily places in Europe, completely divided at the mercy of the big empires, France, the empire, and so on and so forth, that if they wanted to invade Italy, it would have taken 1 minute to do this. But what they actually managed to do was to create an alternative, we would say today, a soft power vision through culture of influence that was able to put very, very small city-states on the same par as very big political players. That was not riskless at all. And this also meant really having to build a confidence with creative minds, really creating an interaction with them. So what is missing today is exactly this: a risk-taking activity and a risk-taking attitude towards cultural commissioning. But why should we be risk-taking in this particular sense? Well, that's the second point. Because as it was already pointed out, we tend to think, for example, I mean, Samed, who works in World Bank, knows exactly why culture is, in some sense, the Cinderella of policy, because there is the usual argument that when it comes to the real issues, culture is a luxury. Let's face it, that's what people think. In the end, schools or hospitals are way more important than museums or libraries. But is this true? Well, what we are learning today, we are in a very special moment because, for example, we are reinventing and rediscovering what has been the role of culture in the shaping of humans. And what we are understanding is that from the very beginning, culture was invented and developed by humans to solve very, very specific problems. If you have, for example, to create, I mean, let's make the simplest possible example. You are a small band of hunters and gatherers, and you can be predated by lions or whatever. And of course, there are two possibilities. So once you stumble into a lion, everybody can just flee in their own direction, hoping not to be catched. Or you can try to create a group, and you can try to really face the lion with the size of and the strength of the group. But to do this, you need what? You need the group cohesion. How do you create group cohesion? Through collective dance and collective singing. We know today that that's the best form of group creation and bonding that humans have. There's no technology invented in the last 20 years that does this better than collective singing or dance. How do we regulate our emotional mood? Sometimes, or for example, curb down anxiety. Sometimes this is a matter of life and death. Think of what has happened during the pandemic. I mean, really the capacity of people to preserve their mental health sometimes are really dependent on what? For example, having access to music you like. Because we are immensely rewarded when we listen to music, and a certain type of music that really resonates with us, literally resonates. We know today that music, for example, can be a painkiller, that music can be, again, one of the strongest possible emotional regulators that we have, and so on and so forth. So the question is, if as humans, nature has bothered us so much to reward us when we have these cultural experiences in such massive way, it's impossible that it's just because culture is, let's say, a side dish that in the end doesn't really matter when it comes to survival choices and challenges. The point is that culture is exactly that particular domain in which we develop cognitive and social abilities that turn out to be fundamental for our daily life in situations that are low stake. Because when you are in a high stake situation, you cannot really experiment and you cannot really develop new skills. It's a matter of life and death. So exactly the reason why we tend to downplay culture, it doesn't seem to be related to basic needs, is the reason why we should. Because culture is able to address our basic needs so fundamentally because it's been developed in that spatial part of our experience in which we experiment novelty when the basic need is not biting you just at the arm's length. So what is the point? Now that we are rediscovering this, we are rediscovering a new agenda. And now it comes to the institutional perspective. And the new agenda is very much about the social impact of culture. Today, we are facing new challenges like global climate change or social inequality or mental health. The usual policy approaches are useful, but they are not, as we know, completely satisfactory in many regards. And one of the reasons why they are not so satisfactory is exactly that they are very instrumental. They don't really have us from the point of view of our own. For example, we understand that climate change is a problem. But in the end, you would like to say, well, okay, climate change is a problem, but I just want my air conditioner on today because it's hot. I mean, why should I care about that in the end? So we understand that instrumentally we should take care, but it's not really having us in the sense that it doesn't really change our way of looking at the world. It's just a constraint. It's more or less like, let's say, the threat of perpetual doom if you are a sinner, from the point of view of historical religions. Of course, I mean, I would like to be a sinner in certain circumstances, but perpetual doom, well, that's a problem. But it's not really that you embrace that particular morale. It's that you are simply afraid of the consequences if you don't. What culture does for us is exactly to create the kind of morale that we need to embrace this kind of pro-social challenges in a completely different way. For example, we know today that people who have regular access to cultural participation tend to be less xenophobic on average, and tend to be, for example, more willing to do properly waste recycling. So you would say, why? I mean, probably it's simply a confounder of education or of income. No. When you factor out education or income, you find that there is this kind of relationship. Because we really tend to downplay. When we find a cultural effect, we immediately tend to think that there must be something else, because it cannot be culture. Because in the end, culture doesn't matter. But what we are saying is exactly the contrary. Think, for example, of the project that the European Union has just launched, the new European Bauhaus. The idea of basically honing the potential of culture in managing the green transition of the European continent. And you would say, come on, I mean, the green transition of the European continent and culture, I mean, there are way more important factors to take into account. That's just, let's say, a communication thing, just put there to make an impression. That's not the point. Behind the vision of the new European Bauhaus, there is the idea that culture changes human behaviors. And it does in ways that are more massive and profound than we tend to think. So what is the agenda today increasingly, for example, at the European Commission level? And we have a massive new program in Europe, both in Horizon, which is the research and innovation program at the European level, in which a whole cluster is devoted to culture. And we have the Creative Europe program, but we have now the launch of the new innovation ecosystem at the European level called KIC, Knowledge and Innovation Community. The previous KICs that Europe has kicked off have been on climate, on food, on raw materials, on energy, on urban transportation and mobility. And the new one is on culture and creative industry. So this really means that there is a clear understanding that the new challenges in the post-pandemic phase can be tackled from the cultural point of view, not as an alternative, but as a powerful complementary approach to the traditional ones. But we have to take it seriously. Is this happening or not? I have already spoken about the European Commission that is really becoming an innovation leader at the global level in this regard. But I can also speak about the OECD that has recently embraced the perspective of culture as a lever of human, social, and economic development. And in this moment, just to give you this glimpse of what's happening now, we are cooperating with the Italian government, who has the presidency for this year of the G20 organization. And for the first time in G20 history, we have a cultural policy agenda. And this cultural policy agenda is, guess what? Also about behavioral change. And the really interesting thing that has been basically endorsed by all G20 countries. We were surprised by how quickly they catched up in terms of understanding the potential of this new perspective. So in terms of game changing, it's not a matter of making a case for it. It's a matter of just drawing the consequences of what's already happening. So if we really understand how important it is to change behaviors in tackling some societal challenges like climate change, you immediately understand that a museum is exactly at the same level than a school or a hospital. And that bringing people to museums in a certain way and eliciting a certain type of attitude is not because we have to force people into doing this, but because we are already completely wired to do this. That's the point. this can really be a game changer in the sense that we are discussing here today. The problem is that we have forgotten this, and in the Renaissance, it was very clear. So Renaissance now means what? Rediscovering what culture has always been. But now, with a completely new awareness and with completely new spectrum of policy tools that we can use to make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I know that we talk very much about culture as a pillar of sustainable development, but I think in your words, we talk about culture as a foundation, something that you don't always see, but you definitely miss when you definitely miss if it isn't there. So thank you very much. I will now pass on to Rainer Kern, who is the Special Advisor, Global Affairs in Mannheim, Germany. And he is the founder, festival director, and artistic director of the biggest German jazz festival, Enjoy Jazz International Festival for Jazz and More. As the representative of the executive mayor of Mannheim and his special advisor, Global and UN Affairs, he's responsible for the setup and strategic development of the new worldwide network platform, the Global Parliament of Mayors, which was launched in 2016. He's also a member of the OECD expert group on SDG investments in cities, and will talk about salons in Mannheim as a game changer. And I will say to Rainer and to the other speakers, if we can try and keep to 5 minutes in order to maximize the time we have breakout rooms later, that will be appreciated. Thank you very much. And over to you, Rainer.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. I just opened a little presentation that underlines what I'm saying through little pictures. And thank you so much, Stephen, for the introduction. And thanks for, I'm very happy that we can launch the Renaissance Now movement today. And at this point, thanks to Doris, who is the initiator of all that. I guess no one has said that so far, but without Doris, we wouldn't be here all. So thanks, Doris, and great that I'm here. I was encouraged to show an example that was shown before in the last years, but maybe not to this audience here. Maybe you don't know. It's still a wonderful example about what Renaissance Now, the idea, means. It's an example from the city of Mannheim. That's the city, by the way, you might not know, where the car was invented and where the Mannheim School was established in the 18th century at the court of the Elector, which is still influencing modern music, what was developed at the time, the Mannheim School. Musicians in the audience will understand what I'm saying. Anyway, it was clear there about 20, 30 years ago that the city needed a post-industrial perspective, a new post-industrial perspective. And it all started here in the City Hall, which is a building like all other buildings could look like. But at the time, the deputy mayor for culture, Peter Kurz, who you've heard already, who is now the mayor of City of Mannheim, he had a vision and a creative idea, which he then, out of that, developed a strategy that was implemented together, and that's important, and that's behind the Renaissance idea, and it reflects to what Pierluigi just said, and Sawe also earlier. It was implemented together with a coalition of business, economy, civil society, university and other educational institutions, and the artistic scene and the city administration. So in brief, the actions that were behind that in the beginning. So there was this relatively problematic district which called Jungbusch in the city of Mannheim. I picked out a cliche photo, but that shows that's a good picture for what problems occurred there. You can imagine high crime rate, drugs, poor housing conditions, the usual, you know what I mean. So it was a very diverse district. And this is where the music strategy, because that was a music strategy that Peter Kurz developed at the time, came in, by the way, in the middle of the biggest crisis within the music industry. So he tackled two challenges, the city itself and the music industry. So Germany's, what happened then? Germany's first and still only startup center for the music industry was built, the Music Park. Germany's first and still only university for pop music was brought to Mannheim after winning a tender from the state, the Pop Academy you can see here. At the same time, the city administration created the position of a pop commissioner, which was quite unique at the time, you can imagine. And the music commission was set up within the city administration. So as a result, a creative center was then built later, in between all these buildings, a student residence. All in one street in the Jungbusch district. All the buildings I've shown you, you can see them here in one row now, are in one street, all along the canal between the river Neckar and the river Rhine. Two rivers are in Mannheim. So it's a two-stream city, although it's not Mesopotamian. So all of this has led to a positive transformation of the district. Less crime, more safety, all the things you can imagine. But creating the framework conditions, that's important, for the district's civil society to develop its surroundings independently and in many participatory formats. So participatory art is the key word here. We would need a lot of time to show you all the wonderful formats that were developed at the time and now also. But one of the most moving ones, Mayor Kurz already mentioned earlier, Mehmet Ungan and the Oriental Music Academy, which is this building. And so that it's an interesting story, and it shows the what Pierluigi said and also Sawa. So there was a frame was built by the city and all the other entities, the economy, the business, the education field and all that. And then this frame could be used by a private initiative by this young Turkish man, Mehmet. And this is so outstanding, this example, that I have to tell it every time when I'm speaking somewhere. And you heard that in Mayor Kurtz's speech. He just took the responsibility and he was unemployed at the time. He started alone, then he had 2 to 3 friends helping him. So out of that, and now in the development, and he then did some social work with his music academy in the streets. He took the street kids from the street, gave them a perspective, brought them back to school. And then this initiative became an official German university study program. And very surprisingly, that's the only place still in Germany where you can study world music. Can you really believe that? I can't, but it's a fact. So this wonderful example, and you have seen very bright buildings, bright and shiny buildings, you could say, very nice, but what does that all mean? But I mean, and if you could see the district, it was totally transformed, but transformation is an ongoing process, of course. But does that solve all the problems in the district in Mannheim? Absolutely no. Is everyone happy and satisfied now? Of course not. Hasn't this led to displacement and gentrification? Yes and no. But the biggest challenge is to maintain this level of development. Of course, there is fatigue, setbacks, and so on. And you all know that continuity is the hardest thing. But starting from this strategy around music again, so music was the key, and participation. So we have achieved a good matrix of development in Mannheim. Internationalization, Mannheim Agenda 2030, through a huge participatory process, the local Mannheim Green Deal, and so on and so on. But the starting point was music again. Music in all its facets and different levels, and participation, which is quite important. Am I talking about paradise? No, I'm talking about Mannheim. And the example shows what can happen, I guess, when the Renaissance Now idea takes hold. And here you can see after the transformation of this district, so people took over and they created like an annual event quite similar to the London Carnival. And that's when all people opened their apartments, they opened their living rooms, they show their own piece of art. So the courtyards are open. It's not that professional musicians are, not only professional musicians are playing, but everyone is involved, as you can see here. And although this might maybe sound obvious to you, but I think if you follow these, if you see these 6 steps, then you can see the idea behind the Renaissance Now. You recognize a problem, you develop a vision, a creative idea, but then you have a joint strategy, not alone. And as Pierluigi very impressively described from the Renaissance time, you have all them together. So you create an environment that geniuses can be active and can have an effect. So but then you use the framework you created for further development within the civil society, and you endure contradictions, I think. But let me end with something negative, I think, not that we are too comfortable now. And Pierluigi already mentioned that, and it was, and Linda also in the chat. All what we're saying is good and fine, but now the pandemic crisis has shown us in a shocking way how high the value of art and culture is in our society. Or rather, it is among those in power, I must say. In Germany, it was and is a catastrophe. An entire sector is on the brink of collapse. So I'm asking me and you, What have we done wrong with our decades-long talk and promotional creativity, art and culture? Why have those responsible not used the power of art and creativity to overcome the pandemic, or have hardly used it at all, or only superficially? I am very excited about that. But where does it hang? Our target level, I guess, must be, and we said that many times, the policy level, the rulers, the decision makers. That's where our strategy of influence have to start. And that's why we would like to bring together science, art, civil society, and policy in a common cause. And we must overcome the divides. Otherwise, we will continue to promote our beautiful themes of art and creativity for the next decades, but only change them cosmetically.
Thank you so much, Rainer, and thank you in particular for making that point that one of the shifts, one of the changes we certainly hope to see through the work of Renaissance Now, through the Culture 2030 goal, is governments, policymakers taking seriously the need to integrate culture, to make culture part of our policy efforts. And of course, in the meanwhile, I'm sure you can explore a town twinning agreement of some sort between Mannheim and Paradise. So Fawaz Habal is the Executive Dean for Education and Research and Senior Lecturer at Harvard's John A. Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. In his time there, he's been instrumental in the development of the intellectual direction for bioengineering and electrical engineering, and has published extensively in materials science, electronics, imaging, and nanophotonics. One major interest has been expanding the curriculum that enables students' creativity and entrepreneurship, to which he brings his own experience of establishing startups. Professor Habal will talk about complexity and how this represents a game changer and an inspiration for our work. So over to you, Professor Habal.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. And first, I have to admit that I've learned everything from Doris, and over last semester, we've been teaching together, and it was fantastic. Tyrone, Doris, and I have been several discussions, and I think it's really thrilling to see that there are over 80 people today on this Zoom. And it's absolutely amazing that Doris was able to bring us together to think and be creative in finding solutions. One of the things I want to do today is I'll share some slides just to illustrate some points. And I want to invite you to think a little bit broader than what we normally look at when we look at SDG. First, I'm going to ask you a question, and I will take you a minute to leave you to think about it. I will not ask to say any answers. But when you think of a cup of coffee, ask how much water exists in this cup of coffee. How much water you have in a cup of coffee. Now, most of us will say a cup of water is a cup of water. A cup of coffee has a cup of water. We forget that coffee itself requires a lot of water to grow, to clean, and to bring it to the table. And when you throw part of a cup of coffee, you're throwing a lot of water. That's really how we think about systems. And that's how I've been teaching and advocating to think about the whole universe around us. So let me start by sharing some slide, which will illustrate this point here that, okay, let's see. I think you can see it here. So first of all, I want to thank you for this lofty information about me. I'm a physicist, I'm a painter, and a potter too. So I have the 3 Ps here. So when we think about the SDG, I want to think about it as a complex systems. And I want to ask, how's the role of art and innovation play in this SDG? We know that over the last century and during this century, we've made an amazing advancement for humanity. We feed a lot of people, we electrify a lot of places, travel around, and so on and so forth. And the problem is these successes are causing some of our issues and some of our problems. And we get addicted to these successes, addicted to the way we're dealing with them and how we solve them and how we solve problems. And we think this is going to be going on forever and will lead to solutions. Then came the SDGs. Now you look at this and you look kind of carefully about it, and you find that everyone has a number and a title, and it gives you the feeling as if these are isolated pieces. That is, if we solve poverty, we can solve it without talking about life below water. We can do it without thinking about the climate. We can do it without looking at the good health and well-being and so on and so forth. And I know recently, I mean, I was one of the people in the 2016 and with other folks with me from Stanford who said, we can't think it this way. We need to think about these as interacting pieces. And this had some resonance, but there is still something else missing. What's missing is, where is the art in this picture? When I look at the SDGs and all the elements, I don't see the work around arts. I don't see how we're going to solve anything. We see a description of the problems. And in this discussion today, we talked about art as a game changer. So where is it? I'm saying we have to go back and revisit this point here. Another point that I should say on the side, these completely devoid of anything to deal with artificial intelligence and big data and all of the issues that bring about. Game changers has to be part of the arts, and art is the game changer. I also want to say that arts support innovations. Doris talked about it, other people talk about it. It facilitates dialogues, it connects people. The most important thing I've learned about how to solve problems is sociability. If you don't have sociability, if you cannot talk to each other and discuss things as equal, female, male, different genders, different orientation, different thoughts, if we don't teach each other and talk to each other as people, as individuals, as human beings, we are not going to solve any of these problems. Sociability, I feel, it's essential for any solutions. And I believe that art is the lubricant that creates sociability. Look at this. This came about much later after SDG were announced, showing how every SDG has particular goals, more particular elements, and how these are all interacting. Yet we think about them as isolated systems. They are not, absolutely not. So when I think about human challenges, we have to think about these as systems. And systems require system solutions. They can't require solution by itself. When Sameh today talked about what do we do? Do we put the money in something versus looking at root causes? If you don't look at root causes, you're not going to be able to solve it. Complex systems, and one could spend hours talking about it, they are systems that have many interacting components. When you see things, you touch one, it affects the others, you have to realize you are dealing with a complex system. It's very different from a complicated system. A Swiss Army knife may be a complicated system, but human challenges are complex systems. And don't try to take complex systems and make them complicated. Don't try to divide them into pieces and try to solve every piece by itself, because it does not work. Interaction gives rise to behavior of the total system, of the human system. And there are structures to these systems that comes from the collective behaviors. Our collective behavior create the particular structures. Now, last but not least here is that we need to keep in mind that there are nonlinear responses, meaning you may talk about something and then discover that as you're solving something, you affect something else. And many times being said, the solutions of the past is creating the problems of today. Last but not least is that there are feedback loops, meaning when you change something, it comes back and enhance something or change something. So complex systems have methodologies around them and need to be viewed as part of the solution. I'm going to give this one very, very quick example about obesity. If you say obesity, what's the solution? Why you have obese people? You will say, well, because they eat a lot and they don't exercise. Completely wrong. And what we find that obesity has something to do with so many things that are really related to many issues that are much broader than you can ever imagine. Here is a diagram of what's obesity element that goes together and causes the problem of obesity. You could find it in the web. It's in the United Kingdom government did this analysis. It took a lot of time to figure it out. So what's missing? What's missing for the SDG is that we need to solve things at the system levels. We need to think at different lenses. We need to operate within particular the complexity as a whole, not by taking pieces and drive them to solution and not respect the others. It requires leadership, that's obvious. It also requires innovation. But most important probably is I think, is that we need to invoke arts as the glue for and for all the SDG element and a way to make changes. And I thank you for listening, and thank you for inviting me to be here.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Habal, and thank you in particular, I think, for making that link of culture as this underlying factor that helps us understand, that helps us deal with these challenges. And I think as we move into the breakout groups in 10 minutes or so, this is really going to help us, I think. I think the final speaker we have is Jose Molinas, before we go into this breakout rooms. Now, Jose Molinas is the director del Instituto de Desarrollo, the Development Institute in Paraguay, and has extensive experience of promoting sustainable development in government, notably in his time as charge of the Technical Secretariat for Economic and Social Development Planning. He's a member of the National Economic Team, coordinator of the executive team of the Social Cabinet, executive secretary of the Excellence Fund for Education and Research, and member of the Strategic Coordination Committee of the Carlos Antonio Lopez Scholarships. And Dr. Molinas, in about 5 minutes, will share his experience of the Harvard course on culture and development. So over to you, Dr. Molinas.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Let me reflect a little bit on the art as a game changer for development policy. And thank you very much, Professor Fawaz, because of you already got an excellent introduction. And I would like to build on some of the points that you have mentioned. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals requires doing things very differently than we are currently doing. And Professor Habal just clearly posed this challenge. I would stress that it requires change in behavior of vast group of people. That is, it requires a truly cultural change. In this process of these 5 minutes, I will briefly recap what I consider to be the mainstream of policymaking today, point out to some limitation of this mainstream framework, and suggest why art can provide a great complement to the current policymaking toolbox. So the way that we do policymaking today, my experience, is that we do look for a cultural change, but we relied on this cultural change to be achieved based on punishment and reward, using mainly monetary and or regulatory tools. We refer to this set of rewards and punishment, the policy community, as to create an incentive structure. An incentive are placed in a policy framework that describe expected cause-effect relationship, define precise indicator to monitor and evaluate the intervention on the implementation, and perform a risk assessment of the initiative, among other things. This approach of policymaking has proved to be useful for advancing in several fronts of the SDGs. So we live now in a world with less poverty, with better health than the case before. But to achieve the SDG as an ambitious, encompassing target, it may not be enough. And some limitations of this mainstream policy-making framework is that the incentive, rewards and punishment, seems to have diminishing returns to affect people's behavior. In several policy areas, people are slow to react to the current system of incentives, generating only modest incremental change that sometimes we consider good enough because it's statistically significantly different from nothing, but it's not enough for the transformational change that we need to achieve the SDGs. So we as a policymaker need to expand our toolbox for reaching our challenging objectives posed by the the SDGs. And here is where art can help us to expand our traditional monetary and regulatory tools. So art, and here are the certain suggestions, art can easily ignite people's passions and accelerate behavioral change in vast groups of populations. We have several anecdotal accounts from Bogota, from Mannheim, and from many other places where we believe that this is a very promising tool for policy making. That art also boosts people's creativity and an innovative solution, as just Professor Pau stressed. Art increases sociability, which is why it fosters innovation, strengthening bonds among people, and which is an important feature of social capital that we all recognize helps policymaking. The policymaking community barely use this tool in comparison with the monetary and regulatory incentive structure. So we believe, or I believe, that we need to build bridges among the policy makers and artists, and to build bridges not to make difficult trade-off, or whether we invest in culture or in health, but build bridges to use art to get better health, less poverty, better education, better institutions, and all the complex system of the SDGs. But in order to bridge and to strengthen the dialogue between artists and policymakers, we need to probably invest more in rigorous impact evaluation that will put in a common language the dialogue with policymakers. I think that rigorous impact evaluation that relies on clear indicators is a necessary condition for policymakers to start using more art as a part of their toolbox. I'm sure there are many other bridges that would be reached, and many of them have been already proposed in the previous intervention. But I think this look towards stressing impact evaluation on the effects of using art in policy making would be a good bridge to start. Thank you very much.